Welcome, summoners, to Vision Denial. My name is Sam, and this is the Road to MSI. On today's docket, we've got Japan can still keep up with the PCS. That doesn't make me like it better that they're there. We got Southeast Asia and Brazil starting off their particular competitive streak. We congratulate FlyQuest on being the second team to qualify and put some questions as to why we still have G2 being the first one before anything else, and more thoughts regarding everything else. Today's episode. Let's get started. First up, let's talk about the awkwardness of, one, we congratulate that FlyQuest has now joined these as the second team to have qualified for MSI, given the fact that they were first to the spring playoffs. The winter split situation with the LEC is a thing that I will, as a broken record, continue to mention is a non-functional system, because looking back as to when FlyQuest made it in, they were playing on patch 14.5. When the winter playoffs come up, G2 wins theirs on 14.2. 3 patches early, on a very different playing field with a different understanding, and a very early set of the particular game. I really hope that going forward, when the playoffs for the LEC go up, and I mean the actual playoffs, not the best of 3 format, but the best of 5, that G2 have qualified for that part, and that they show promising future. So far from everything that I've seen, keeping up with the regular season, it seems to be the case, but it leaves me with a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, given how often European teams will be first to qualify for any international event, whilst not having been evaluated under the same circumstances that every other team does. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the situation? I really want to see whether or not this is just me. I say this frequently, but I can't be, or I'm hoping that I'm not the only one that thinks that this is a little strange that they qualify so early compared to everyone else who is still playing their regular seasons and are developing their strategies around the current meta from that point. Next, second on the docket, we've got ourselves the PCS playoffs happening in Southeast Asia, where we've already discussed how they consolidated the Oceanic League and the Japanese League, the LCO and LJL respectively. And as the years previous, the LCO, their representatives can't keep up. They have a very difficult time doing so, and that is not surprising. It gives less of a chance for that particular region to even show their style going into MSI, because they will not be able to ever qualify given the caliber that is the PCS. And it gives less chances for the PCS teams to even qualify, even the ones that are like lower seeded. And we get the same problem again, but this time the Japanese League brings in their 2 teams. Or 2 teams? No. They bring in... Yeah, they're 3 teams. They bring in 3 teams. Which means the PCS still has fewer teams than they can actually work with. And going through the history of this particular set of playoffs with their bracket stage and their actual or their group stage and then their actual bracket stage, only 1 Japanese team made it to the actual playoff, so to speak. And Japan had a much easier time actually qualifying. Sort of. They're more competitive, but at what cost? It doesn't seem like it was very much of anything. And I've talked about it, or you will notice within the review of the actual best of 5, the Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming, or the SHG, or SoftBanks, or Hawks, that particular team having a buy-in did not change much of the results going forward. They were much more competitive, and it was a better case study of what this looks like than when the LCO teams came in. but it robs the regions of Japan's ability to demonstrate their style internationally, which feels bad the more and more it happens, and to a point where I think because of the LCO's inability to make it to the bracket stage and the LJL's only getting one team in from a buy-in, and depending on how their next set of best of fives, either the next one or the next 2 to 4 go, I could see them just completely drop those regions completely and use them as like challenger teams. And that doesn't feel great. And I've mentioned this as like part of the absorption process, but hey, we can't tell what economically they'll be doing next year yet. Next on the docket, let's take a look at the holistic approaches, or let's look at a holistic view of the best of fives, the different playoffs that we had. For this week's videos, we've got ourselves March 19th through March 24th. A nice set of playoffs where both the Southeast Asian League, PCS, and Brazil's CBLOL start their series. CBLOL with lots of fun, PCS with a lot of like mixed baggage. But let's take a look at this. If ever you want to see these go up first as I watch them, link for the TikTok is down below. So let's take a look. The first reverse sweep of playoffs, and honestly, it says a lot about both teams. Now, both sides held some very strong vision play, moments of brilliance with neutral setups, skirmishes, and macro plays, and especially individual micro showcases. Now, Rainbow 7 had an impressive first 2 games. I almost believe they were going to have a nice, easy, clean sweep, but a combination of proper adaptations from Estral and impatience and cockiness led to the very unfortunate reverse sweep. While Estral had me very worried in their first 2 games, it was touch and go in the last one, but honestly, pretty clean. It's just unfortunate that the wins are kind of soured by the very bad read of the matchup and draft choices that made life harder for the whole roster in those first 2 games. Honestly, both teams could be great representatives for the LLA at MSI, and it would not surprise me to see a rematch at the finals, but the impatience, recklessness, and cocky approach hurt both teams in a way that made the series in one part bizarre, another part fun, and ultimately just kind of a disappointment to watch. My MVP for this series is Ackerman for how he controlled team fights throughout this series, and an honorable mention to Summit, who was just playing out of his mind. This was the semifinals in the upper bracket for the LLA Movie Star Rainbow 7 versus Estral Esports. There's a huge difference between Game 1 talent and post-Game 1 talent. Now, Beyond Gaming held such a standard and lackluster approach to the series. They either take their strengths within their ability to team fight, rinse, repeat, barely enough vision to pass by, recycle side lane pressures, be first to neutrals, but not do anything to set it up, just fight. Now, I really hope that Beyond look back at this series and realize the lack of adaptation, creativity, proactive play is what hurt them the most. And that they just can't assume that their opponents will throw or just keel over. Meanwhile, the Talons had incredible vision, great neutral setups, fantastic coordination, and really well-adapted plays and drafts. Except for Game 1. In fact, all of this praise comes after such slow warm-up to that form. I'm really hoping that the Talons don't just like have warm-up games from here on out, because this form should have been their default and expectation. My MVP of the series is Aja for how much he controlled and applied like skirmishes and side lanes he applied around. This was round 1 of the PCS's bracket stage, Megabank Beyond Gaming versus Paris Saint-Germain Talon Esports. Second reverse sweep of playoffs, and this one just feels bad. While both teams hold serviceable vision play, decent coordination, nice understanding of neutrals, and overall just pretty solid teams. All Knights just kept getting worse as the series went on, either from bizarre target selection, loss of control of the pace of the game, overall macro choices that only resulted in lost trades. nothing gained. It made me wonder what had happened after Game 2. And equally baffling, Isidus went from a team with bizarre approach to neutrals, overzealous engages, to very strong control of the pace of the game, fantastic map control, incredible coordination, in what seemed like a single game. It's never good to see either side of this coin, from either great first game, bad in all the others, or needs a few games to warm up before getting good. It indicates to me a strong likelihood that international play would be incredibly difficult for them. Hopefully, both squads correct their issues the next time that they play. My MVP for this series is Pan for the crazy amount of space he created for his team to succeed. This was lower bracket round 3 of the LLA. All Knights versus Isidus. Clean sweeps can be hard to analyze sometimes. In this situation, however, it really wasn't. Deep Cross Gaming was a team that had some strong neutrals, solid vision play, good early game approaches, and then followed all of that up with some of the most dispassionate, passive, mistake-punishing play style you can have. I really hope they fix their act in the lower bracket, because this is not how you play a series. You can't just wait for errors all the time. Now, while Frank showed some incredible coordination and individual prowess, their vision, neutral setups, macro choices, heck, even micro choices sometimes leave a lot to be desired. If it wasn't for the very lackluster play of Deep Cross Gaming, Frank would be losing so much off of the very high-risk play they use. Now, high-risk plays can be worth it, but doing so without the vision or proper setup or understanding is a totally different thing. My MVP of the series is Jim Yen for how much he controlled the space around team fights. This was PCS's bracket stage round 1. Frank Esports versus Deep Cross Gaming. Major aggression and small hiccups mean everything in this series. Now, right off the start, both teams had moments of excellent vision, map play, micro choices, coordination, and adaptation. The biggest difference between the two was the frequency in which one side had control. 100 Thieves are much more passive than they should have been given the onslaught that was Team Liquid's approach. They would have moments of hesitation or be slow to answer plays, and I would wonder why? Mostly because it wasn't consistent on either side. Frequently, 100 Thieves would show moments of full aggression and tempo, and I would be impressed, and then it would just fizzle out. Meanwhile, Team Liquid are playing at a very wild pace here, and it's incredible to see them holding out this way when my concerns were around how they would close or play out the late game. Some signs of that concern still show, but with this pace, we might not need to have that worry so soon. We'll have to see. My MVP of the series goes to Impact for how much space he controlled at all moments. This was the lower bracket round 2, 100 Thieves versus Team Liquid in the LCS. The freaking Nexus is open to minions. Oh. The unfortunate nature of how both of these teams play is usually met with a sense that they kind of lack awareness, which is strange given that both have very solid coordination and a really good vision play. With Kaboom, especially in the early game, holding a level of control that is very satisfying to watch. But much of that leaves in the late game, while for Pain, they kind of dial things to 11 all the time, creating this kind of sense that skirmishing is their only play, which, given their gung-ho attitude, would be a fair assumption, but you can tell that they plan out angles of approach very nicely for each one of these skirmishes. My biggest issue is that neither side has a strong sense of how to play the map. Macro plays take a solid backseat to the skirmish-to-skirmish moments. And this is best exemplified by, 5 dorks chasing after 2 players as the minions are destroying their base when they had no Nexus turrets to speak of. My MVP for this series is Stan for the amount of pressure he applied and absorbed during these skirmishes. This was round 1 of the CBLOL, Kaboom Esports versus Pain Gaming. I would say that the Flying Oysters were incredible in this series, but that would omit a lot of the issues that came from Frank. Now, Frank joined the series with some of the most passive and defeatist play I have ever seen. They kept up vision just to see how they would die over and over again. Now, it became a little better as they swapped out Jimmy N for Pretender, but the crux of the issue came from poor drafting choices and near zero proactivity to even try to counter or go for any of their win conditions. Meanwhile, the Flying Oysters played a clean series. Some solid vision, good neutral setups, incredible coordination, and honestly, much of what was impressive from them in this series is slightly overinflated from the matchup. But even aside from the matchup and the occasional over-aggressive micro-hiccup, the Flying Oysters showed many of the hallmarks of a good international contender, and it would not surprise me to see them qualify based off of the other competitors we've seen so far. My MVP for this series is Shun, just for the consistency of play throughout the series. This was round 2 of the upper bracket of the PCS. Frank Esports versus CTBC Flying Oysters. Los Grandes needs a freaking map reading class. When it came to Los Grandes, most of it is fine. From neutral setups to vision play to coordination, all of it is serviceable to excellent. But when the time came, we had a team who never opted to lean into the advantages that they would garner, keep passive play while waiting for mistakes, and could not work any macro plays to save their life. Literally. While Red Canids, for their part, are equally serviceable in all of these aspects, except when it comes to vision, it is used excellently, but oftentimes ignored for very overzealous engages, and their macro play, which is downright excellent. Now, I made fun of Los Grandes for their inability to read the map, but I only think that is half of it. Even teams that would react properly to some of these plays would sweat from how Red Canids play from behind, and continue to look for angles to gain and regain control within the game. Too bad, they are often the ones that lose it also. My MVP for this series is Branke for how consistent he was in this series. This was round 1 of CBLOL, Los Grandes versus Red Canids Kalunga. Congrats to FlyQuest on being the second team to qualify for MSI. Now, Cloud9 held a lot of solid early game plays, some decent vision approaches, the better of these two teams' neutral setups, and yet the adaptations were just not enough. As FlyQuest kept playing ranged, re-engaged compositions, Cloud9 would just double down on very hard engage and dive-oriented ones, and it just didn't work out. And not without a lack of trying, obviously. The coordination for Cloud9 is there, but FlyQuest decided to really show up today, the coordination being the strongest suit. Honestly, FlyQuest still holds some concerns for me, from their bizarre laxed early game to inconsistent vision, very rushed neutral plays, and a reliance to snowball off of the mistakes of their opponent, leave me concerned that stronger teams internationally won't let them play the way that they would want usually. But as is, this was an incredibly scary team-fighting team that was also a lot of fun to watch. My MVP for this series is Jensen for never dying in all 3 games. Holy shit. While this was the outcome I kind of expected, this wasn't the scoreline I thought that would be attached to it. Now, the Hawks show some solid play overall, better than expected, from their adaptation around drafts, solid coordination, consistent vision play, and overall strong sense of win conditions. But their proactivity is inconsistent, neutrals seem to fall by the wayside all too often, and we wind up with micro choices that are more than questionable due to the previous issues mentioned. The Hawks have the chance to make some waves for the LJL, but as is, I don't see them doing much better in this playoff. Meanwhile, the Talons continue to show their inconsistencies in ways that baffle me, from creating drafts that are much more challenging than needed, to overforcing plays, to being unable to consistently close out games. They show moments of brilliance every so often, from vision to coordination, and clearly understand how to approach the macro, but from what we've seen, I really wouldn't want this squad as the PCS reps in MSI. They can do better, but my MVP of this series is Maple, who is playing out of his mind in these skirmishes. This was the upper bracket round 2. Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming versus Paris Saint-Germain Talents Esports. There's a lot of cool playoffs that happen. Some frustrating ones, but a lot of fun ones nonetheless. A noticeable trend that I've seen here is an understandable apathy towards what is technically the matchups in top lane and jungle, outside of what they hold as their roles within everything. The variety of picks allows for a lot of expression from team to team, but between Viego, Lee Sin, Poppy, Rumble, there is quite a number of different types of champions that are given that make the jungle role feel apathetic towards the drafting scene. The same goes towards top lane, where top lane still has a variety of either very heavy skirmishers to just tanks or engage tools. And, alright, cool. The shining star, however, comes to the bot lane, of which feel problematic in some sense, where this is the first time from years prior. There's been people who complained from Zoe to Yumi to any number of new champion that seems extremely broken. And on my end of an analytic view, I feel the disconnect between the played, lived experience of having to have these champions in there and what holistically in the professional scene seems to be more of an adaptation choice and things that need to be compensated for. Up until Smolder. And while it has not completely shifted to the end of this feels wrong per se, it is bizarre that an aspect of drafting is now crafted around how many of the counter picks for Smolder are removed first before he's picked, and that if he's picked, there is a clock immediately set for an automatic win. I don't think it's quite there yet. There are moments where I've literally seen skirmishes just turn on a dime from poor execution, and yet because enough time had happened within the game, it didn't matter. It leaves a sour taste in my mouth, mostly because on its own, there's been plenty of champions with this situation. You would just automatically ban it. But because of its very distinct weakness in the laning phase and how strong it becomes at the end game, it creates this interesting and unfortunate tug and pull of the pick ban phase, where if you want to play it or force it, or are up against a team who plays incredibly well blind the counters towards Smolder, you just remove it and pick it, and then you're good to go. It creates an interaction that I do not like in pick and ban that I have not seen before. Where before, it sucks because you just permaban on red side or on blue side, depending on how the pick ban situation goes, but it's a permaban. And so it's an accounted factor. And this time, it feels less like an accounted factor and more like a lottery slot. At least those are my thoughts. From there, from the ramblings of the observations of very problematic pick ban phases to the what I would say is the nature of fusing regions together haphazardly, and the fun different bestifies that have happened, I would like to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And thank you again for everyone that watches. It greatly appreciated. Let's see where this leads as more and more teams are about to qualify. Finals are coming out from many of the regions. The LPL and the LCK start this week. Yes, they do. And much more in the coming weeks of the road to MSI. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.